Alright, so in this video, I'll be talking briefly about technical aspects of my project. I'm gonna start from very beginning. Many options which are available to player are quite limited, as player can do only two things. Player can either quit the application using the user interface buttons. By pressing the escape button, player can pop up the menu, and then from here they can choose to quit, then confirm the choice by pressing either yes or no. Upon pressing no, the game will just return to the choosing option menu. Player can also reset the whole progress. So if player decides just to start playing from the beginning of the game, they can opt for this option. So the first scene loads, and then player will be automatically loading the game after resetting the application from the first scene. There is no currently no level selection option, so player can either start from the beginning or they can continue playing until they finish the whole game. Starting with simple mechanics, we'll go into turning. So player can turn around in four directions using the arrow keys. Um, Turning will not spend player's action point. I'll be talking about action and turns order in a little bit. Um, Player action will only be wasting the turn if they decide to press enter, and this will move player one tile forward. So player will always move one tile in direction they're opposing. If there is any obstruction on the tile they're trying to move into, such as walls, such as doors, enemy, then player will be automatically stopped. They will hesitate, they will not use their turn, and then they will just remain at the same tile. Another type of movement a player can opt for is rolling movement mechanics. So important thing to mention for that movement, there's one turn preparation. So player will initially turn into the ball, but it will waste one turn. So in that position, the player will still not move at all. They will stay at the same time as if they just skipped the turn, and then they will start moving in a straightforward direction. So the direction they're opposing, again, as if it was a normal movement. So players will move three tiles during the same turn. That means if player moves three tiles forward, then the turn will be stopped, or upon reaching the obstruction, so same wall, enemy, or doors, at the end of the third movement. So even though player can move three tiles, even if there is obstruction at the end of the third tile, the player movement still will be stopped, and if they're obstructed by anything, they will automatically turn into the normal position again. So they will waste one turn, then afterwards they will be able to turn around freely and choose the direction or skip the turn as they want to. They cannot alter their actions if they're still rolling. That means if player is rolling and they didn't meet any obstruction during the previous turn, they cannot turn, they cannot alter their movement. They would keep rolling it during the same, um, following the same pattern. So still rolling forward upon meeting the obstruction. That's the only option when the player can decide to strategize a little bit differently. And the last course of action that player can choose is skip their turn. So they can choose not to do anything during their turn, allowing enemies and boards during their turn instead. As I mentioned, upon finishing their turn or wasting the turn of player character, the enemies will always start first before the board. So enemies will take their move. If enemies can move multiple tiles at the same turn, they will move one by one. So according to array of enemies, each enemy will take one step forward. Then if there are enemies with still available moving points, they will move one after another um, until every enemy uses every moving point. When it comes to board, it's got its last turn after the enemies. So if all enemies finish the turn, the board will activate. So it will initiate sequence of spikes. For example, some spikes can disappear or appear or can be delayed, so they could basically stay the same. Projectiles will move, rockets will explode, stuff like that will happen just at the end before the player turn will happen again. So that's the flow of the turn. When it comes to basic actors included in game, we've got pressure plates. Pressure plates can be attached to any activable objects. So those objects include doors, they include spikes, they include some ward traps. Um, this element was not used in the game, but the plates can still be attached to wall components, to wall traps. Pressure plates will activate those objects. So if anything is attached to it, it will immediately start being active. So start shooting projectiles or start harming the player or activate the spikes, stuff like that. Unless they were inactive, then they're just gonna change their activation status to reverse. Buttons look very, very similarly to plates, with one difference. Buttons need to be physically pressed. So when player is um, next to the button, so on the same tile, they can choose to move towards the wall where the button is. Obviously, their movement will be stopped because they cannot go through the obstruction, but the button will be pressed instead, so the objects will be activated. Enemies cannot activate the buttons because they will not move towards walls on purpose. They can bump through the walls, but the buttons can't be activated only from the player's perspective. Plates can be activated by both enemy and player, and they will be activated each time they step on the tile. So if the tile is occupied by any drone, then all activable objects will automatically reverse its activation status. From passive game elements, we've got doors, which will open and close the passage for player. And there could be multiple doors attached next to each other, so it could just basically activate the whole wall. It will appear or disappear for an activation. From trap elements, we've got a few actors that can harm and instantly kill the player. So when enemy encounters any dangerous element, they will instantly die and reset the scene. So the game obviously doesn't start from the beginning, only from the current level. So spikes will automatically kill any object, even if it's enemy actor, if they collide. So if they are detected with any other objects at the same time on them. So spikes can activate because of turn flow, while the player or any drone is on them. Then obviously it will still count as a kill. Player can still move towards the spike, which will kill the player. They will not be obstructed. This will not stop player from moving towards. Especially important, bearing in mind the rolling movement. Player is not going to be stopped meanwhile. We've got three types of enemies. The basic enemy will patrol corridors between 2 points that are assigned in an editor. If they encounter any obstruction on their way, they'll immediately reverse their movement. So they'll attempt to go to the previous point upon reaching the start again, and then trying to reverse its movement. There is a second type of movement for those enemies. They've got circular movement that could be signed, which will basically mean after reaching the starting point, they'll automatically aim to go to the ending point, which will basically mean they'll keep going in circles rather than reversing in U direction each time. We've got another version of those enemies. Same as patrol enemies, they were really. At the beginning, they'll just walk around few array points on the board until they see the player in a straight line. So if there's no wall, no obstruction in a straight line between the enemy and player, they'll automatically start chasing it in a quite stupid manner because they will only try to adjust the row and column to player's position. So now interesting thing, if the follow drone sees the player on the same row, they'll always try to go to adjust the row so it corresponds to players. If it's seen on the same column, they will try to adjust the column as a main priority. If there's a wall on the same column, then obviously they're gonna go for row instead just to try to get close to the player. So if there is no possible way, if the follow drone can get closer to the player, such as they are both obstructed from both directions, row and column, and they cannot get physically closer to them, they will just not move. They will stop in place. And this is gonna be the complete opposite to the smart enemy, the last type, that's got a pathfinder function that works on many mathematical functions, but efficiently it seeks for the best way in order to reach the player character. The shortest path, always trying to aggressively chase it. Obviously, the enemy will become aggressive only upon seeing the player in a straight line. Unless it's stated in the editor, there is an option where the level designer can choose so enemy starts aggressive follow from the start of the game. We've got projectile shooters, so wall traps. We've got two types of projectiles. We've got simple projectiles that will basically kill any actor on their way, with both its player character and patrol drones, and missiles. So the only difference between missiles and projectiles are the missiles are explosive, so they will kill any objects around them upon colliding with any wall or door. So if the missile explodes upon obstructing with anything, they will kill anything that is on 9 tiles, so in corners, on left, right, up, and down of that collision. So player and enemies need to stay very much away from missiles. So player must be very aware of this while going through corridors, because they could get unexpectedly killed if they see the missile, even if they avoid them directly. From technical elements of the game, we've got exit points. They will basically load the next scene upon stepping on the tile. So there will always be a scene assigned in a board manager. I will talk about managers in a second. And the scene will be ready to be activated upon reaching the end of the map. We've got simple UI, just so the player is aware of each existing mechanism in a game, so they don't get confused, they don't forget anything, because there's no other possible way of finding this information. There's no tutorial in game at the moment. It's only the tutorial showing some simple um, input. When it comes to level design, gradually going with the narrative. So from the basement, player goes for more laboratory looking like environment, increasing the difficulty, introducing new elements gradually as I could in 20 levels, trying to fit it in 20 levels, and obviously implementing all mechanics that I was working hard on during this year. So I basically don't skip any missiles work, puzzles, or any smart enemy puzzles, things like that. That's why it's just a few puzzles, including those elements, just to present the work, just present the demo, and the opportunities I could have with designing future levels. Looking at the more technical side of the project, I mentioned managers. We've got a few types of managers. We've got the overall game manager that shares information between other managers. So basically, it masters the game. It's responsible for deconstructing some of the game elements, sending um, the signals, the ticks, the twitches to other managers, so they start destroying uh, the other assigned components, such as player characters. So there are no null references left between the scenes. All manager is responsible for holding the map elements, as the name says. So um, I made the whole experience very editor friendly. So I want to make sure that my level creation process doesn't take significantly much time, so I don't have to operate between moving the transforms of the objects, so everything lies in a perfectly straight line, so it's visually appealing. And so I don't have to do a lot of um, functional meshing. So all the buttons, all the functional parts of the project are already there, ready to be activated. So board manager will always have option of adjusting the width and the length of the map. So it will automatically build some tile prefabs, and upon going for less than necessary, it will always remove the old ones, nulling the references, so there are no errors, no editor exceptions, etc. All bugs were removed. There's a lot of experimentation with this, but at the end, I think it was worth it because it would help me in the future with actually implementing this project into some more detail. All tiles can be separately pressed, and they've got all elements ready to be activated or deactivated. So things like start tile, like exit point, like buttons, like spikes, they're all already existing on a tile prefab element, which is completely separate component to board manager. Board manager builds the board from little tiles that have complete separate function, and they're responsible for checking other things. So, for example, tile cannot contain two large objects components at the same time at the beginning. So it is quite logical that the tile cannot contain an enemy and spikes at the same time on it, because the enemy will be automatically killed, or pressure tile and spikes, because it would just purely make no sense. So the level editor is forbidden from doing certain actions, and it's going to be informed about this in debug log. So adds a lot of opportunities here, and it just made very easy, very user friendly. If even some random person would like to create a map, uh, building the logic and building a map from the scratch. When it comes to turn manager, communicates between enemies, between player, between boards, disabling or enabling players' input when they can move, what they can do, checking for deaths of all actors, also debugging if enemy turn lasts for weird reasons, for a lot long for long periods of time, then it will automatically switch to board's turn if any board manager, if any board elements exist at the moment in game. The component manager will be controlling all aspects of the till prefab that are activated in the game. So if a level designer decides to activate any spikes, any tiles, any buttons, those components will be up under observation of component manager. It will be observed how they communicate, what they do, not only for debugging reasons, but so all enemies could be detected, and their position could be checked with player's position if the player character should be dead, and etc. etc. And that's gonna be everything from technical side of the game. Made very user friendly from the editor side and pretty straightforward on the player side. So all elements are clear and everything collaborates with each other with no existing bugs, as there are many checks placed in place, and player can enjoy their experience without necessity of resetting the game, resetting the progress and stuff like that. And so basic functionality, functions, puzzle logic, everything, it should create a fun and interactive game I expected it to be.